Easy on this log bridge. Oh, hey guys, welcome back to the King Kong review series. So as promised, we're going to take a look at another project from the mind of Willis O'Brian that in return inspired Toho to bring Kong to Japan for better or for worse. But it was not Godzilla that was Kong's original opponent, but another monster that predates Kong himself. So, without further ado, let's take a look at King Kong vs. Frankenstein. So the story of this one is a little odd and kinda cool. Taking place in the 1950s, the film would have followed the great-grandson of Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Watch the Universal Frankenstein movies for a full recap. Who seeks to continue his family's legacy by creating another monster. This time, instead of using parts from dead bodies, he would create the creature by sewing together pieces of different animals, as well as making the monster a giant in order to display him in a circus. Meanwhile, we cut back to Kong on Skull Island, who it turns out survived his fall from the Empire State Building and was shipped back to his island home.
Bull fucking shit!
But it turns out that the son of Carl Denham wants to carry out his late father's original dream and recapture Kong for display. When Denham Jr. meets Frankenstein in San Francisco, they decide to combine their efforts in making the greatest show on Earth, by having Kong and Frankenstein's monster do wondrous feats for selling spectators. But when things start to go literally ape, Kong and the monster duke it out in the streets of San Francisco, eventually leading to the Golden Gate Bridge to meet their demise. So first of all, I gotta say, this is a ridiculous concept, but you know what? I'll say it. It looks so damn cool. Full of references, making it possibly canon to both the original Kong and the Universal Frankenstein movies, as well as chemistry between characters, and a ton of possibilities with action scenes and special effects, this could have been a great wonder to behold, and Willis O'Brian's animation could have been at his finest work yet. Speaking of which, this was at the time O'Brian was not in the best of swings. He had made some pretty decent flicks, including The Black Scorpion and The Giant Behemoth, as well as handing his craft over to his apprentice Ray Harryhausen, but nothing on the level of his Lost World Kong days. Many projects he wanted to make, many studios passed on them, and it seems nobody really cared about his work other than Kong. Out of desperation, he decided his ape friend was his only alternative to boost his career again. Having been a fan of the original Frankenstein novel, he wanted to do an animated short adaptation in the early 1920s, but could not get the rights from Mary Shelley. Once having the idea for Kong vs. Frankenstein came up, he sought to seek out the rights to the character. After writing a basic, lengthy story outline, as he's known to do, he sent it to RKO to pitch the movie, since they had still contained custody of the original Kong. But by the early 1960s, RKO was no longer a big-time movie studio, and a lot of their films were sold off to other companies. However, they still retained the sequel, remake, and merchandising rights to many of their films, including the original Kong, and other studios had to receive permission or a deal to obtain the rights to the future of a franchise that was owned to them. The man in charge of the studio at the time was David O'Shea, and he loved O'Brian's concept and told him to meet with a producer named John Beck to start work on a script. But sadly, it turned out to be a big mistake. While Beck and O'Brian had a handshake deal, Beck ended up screwing O'Brian over big time. The first thing they did was delete all of the Frankenstein storylines and retitling it King Kong vs. Prometheus. No, not that one. And they began pitching the storyline out to other studios without O'Brian present. One of the studios that had their attention was Japan's very own Toho, who also wanted to make a film with Mary Shelley's monster battling the king of the monsters, Godzilla. When both Beck, RKO, and Toho met to discuss the King Kong vs. Prometheus storyline, both mentioned the Frankenstein ideas. But what sparked was a bigger idea that eventually became the idea of King Kong vs. Godzilla in 1962. And while the film ultimately returned King Kong to the big screen, his creators suffered a major loss. When O'Brian found out his concept was stolen by RKO and Beck, he was struck with shock and sadness. Later in 1962, he died at the age of 76. It's not clear what exactly caused the great effects legend's death, but many fans have said that it was a long life of tragedy and a broken heart for his beloved creation are all there as a response. As for Merian C. Cooper at the time, he was furious and sought legal action. He felt that the character, story, and films of Kong, as well as any other future projects involving his creation, belonged to him. This issue would not be resolved until much later after Cooper's death, that the rights to the films King Kong and Son of Kong belonged to RKO. While the characters and story did belong to Cooper and his estate, and during the time till his passing, there was nothing Cooper could do to stop Beck and Toho with proceeding with their project.
Well, there's a good reason.
And what of the Frankenstein concept that was present in all this? Well, not wanting to waste the idea, Toho eventually made 2 films that involved the famous monster. One was titled Frankenstein Conquers the World, where he grows into kaiju-like size and fights another giant monster named Baragon, not to be confused with Barugan from the Gamera series. Later, a sequel was made with 2 kaiju Frankenstein monsters titled War of the Gargantuas, where the twin brother monsters battle it out in a model kit Japan. But to sum up the concept of King Kong vs. Frankenstein, I think it has the right idea for a concept which nowadays would be somewhat silly, but could pull off some great action scenes and the idea of connecting both the original Kong and Universal Frankenstein storylines. So I'd give this once again a 7 out of 10. It's got great potential, and who knows, maybe monsters like the Mummy or Dracula could be thrown into the mix.
Listen, Drac, how does King Kong like his steak?
I don't know. How does King Kong like his steak?
Medium roar!
Okay, maybe not. So after the colossal mess that was Frankenstein and the many Toho Godzilla films, what other lost projects were there in the Kong history? Well, next time we'll be delving into a big part of the Kong history, as many other studios wanted to do a remake in the 60s and 70s, one of which was England's own Hammer Studios. So we'll see you next time.